The acoustic guitar in our song sounds just a little bit dull to me. So how do I change the tone of the acoustic guitar and make it a bit brighter? Well, we use an EQ. An EQ is just short for equalizer, and an EQ is basically just a tone control. If you're familiar with the tone controls on your car stereo or a home stereo that allow you to adjust the treble and bass and sometimes mids, then you already have some experience with an EQ. If you haven't used anything like that, don't worry, you'll catch up quickly. We're going to use an EQ to remove the low bass and bring out the sparkle in the acoustic guitar. So let's insert REAPER's built-in ReaEQ on the acoustic guitar track. Let's go over here. And we're looking for ReaEQ. There we go. Excellent. So we've set up the default for ReaEQ to be the Audio Hacker basic 3-band plus high-pass filter. So there are actually 4 bands of EQ. Now, what is a band? Well, bands are just points on the frequency spectrum. So there are 4 points that we can adjust on the frequency spectrum with this equalizer. And looking at the graphical display here, we have the bass or low frequencies on the left and the high or treble frequencies on the right. Most of the time, I'm going to refer to them as low and high. Now let's look at the 4 bands. Now I'm going to skip band 1 because it's a little bit different. I'm going to skip to band 2. Band 2 is our low shelf EQ. And this is basically the same as the bass control on your stereo. So this lets us boost or decrease the level of the bass frequencies. Now, unlike your stereo, which probably only has a gain knob, in a sense you can either boost or cut those low frequencies, we have 2 other parameters which we can control. We can control the frequency as well as the bandwidth. So let's go through those and make sure that we understand what all that means. So I'm going to play the acoustic guitar track. I'm going to solo it so we can hear it more clearly. And I'm going to start by just increasing the gain so we get more bass. Or less. Something else we can do with this is change the frequency at which it's cutting or boosting. So I can, if I bring the frequency higher, it affects more frequencies in the song. So I'm getting into the mids. If I bring this all the way up, I'm just boosting the volume of everything. So I'll bring this back down. The bandwidth changes the shape of that slope to something very gentle, and this affects more frequencies on either side of the point. This is much more specific to this exact area. Those are what those controls do. I'm going to put the bandwidth back to 2, the gain back to 0. So there we go. So those are the 3 parameters that we can control with the low shelf EQ. Now I'm going to skip band number 3 and we're going to skip right to number 4 because band number 4 is the mirror image of band 2. So it's the high shelf or the treble control on your stereo system. The parameters all work the same way. So if I boost or cut, I can also change the bandwidth to be steeper or shallower. And I can change the frequency to have an effect on more of the audio or just the very, very, very high frequencies. And we'll set this back to 0. So we can also type in here the frequencies or gain that we want to have our EQ set to. So the 3rd band is like the mid band. Now it's a little different because this one is a cut or boost that is centered on a specific frequency. In this case, 1000 hertz or 1 kilohertz. And the bandwidth can be very narrow. We can boost a very, very, very narrow amount, or we can cut a very narrow amount. Now in this case, bandwidth also can mean octave. So when we have this set to 2, which is the default, this is setting this gentle cut over a 2-octave bandwidth. We can narrow that to just be 1 octave. And if we get down to about 10% of an octave, we're pretty much down to a very specific note if you've got a note in your mix that is causing a little bit of a problem, like it's sticking out a little bit or it's disappearing, you can find the frequency of that note and bring it up or bring it down so that it's equal with the rest of the recording. And that's part of the reason why we might call it an equalizer. Now let's look at band 1. First, I'm going to set this back to its default. Let's look at the band 1. So what's different about band 1? Well, band 1 is called a high pass. So what does that mean? Let's enable it and take a look. So you'll see the line has drawn like a downward slope to the far left. And that's basically meaning that it's just cutting frequencies below 75 hertz. So there's no boost option with a high pass EQ. Our gain control doesn't do anything. Our frequency does. We can control how high or low that is. I'm going to put it back to 75. And the bandwidth will change the shape of that. But our gain doesn't do anything because all this is letting frequencies above 75 pass, which is why they call it a high pass. But I can also look at it like a low cut because it's cutting the frequencies below that. Let's take a listen to the difference that makes to the acoustic guitar. If I disable it, it doesn't seem to sound much different. That's because it's just getting rid of the very, very low frequencies that aren't really adding anything to the guitar's sound. Now, you wouldn't actually do what I'm about to do, but I'm about to show you the exact opposite of what we're cutting out. So instead of a high pass, I'm going to switch this to a low pass. So now you can see it's actually cutting everything above 75 and just letting the audio below 75 come through. So let's listen to that. It's just kind of a rumbly, mumbly sound, and that is not adding anything to our mix. So when we take that out by using the high pass, we're actually cleaning up that frequency space and leaving room for the bass and the kick drum. In fact, putting a high pass filter on pretty much every track except your bass and drum tracks can really help to clean up your mix. Now, how do we make that guitar sound more sparkly? Well, we can just boost the high shelf, right? Well, not quite yet. Let's see if we can get away with cutting a little bit more on the low frequencies first that we don't need in our mix. So I'm going to just play this again. I'm going to bring the frequency up a little higher. Oh, I'm starting to actually hear the difference now. So I don't want to go up that high. Bet you 100. I'm going to put it for 100. Let's turn it off. Good, I'm not really hearing a huge difference, but I know that it's cleaning up those low frequencies. And now that the low frequencies are cleaned up, now we can start with our high shelf. And what's great is we can actually just grab the number here in the graphical area and pull it up, change the frequency, moving left to right, or cut or boost by dragging up and down. Now let's try bypassing that. And on, and off. We turn it back on. And now I'm getting that little bit of extra sparkle in the top end I was looking for. I think we're really going in the right direction. Let's hear it in the context of the mix. I'm going to turn it off. Kind of flat. Now I'm going to turn it on. It's a shame you found again the things you thought. And that's exactly what I was looking for. It's a very subtle difference, but it just makes the pick sound of the guitar just come out just a little bit more. So I'm going to go through and add those high pass filters to all the tracks except the bass and the drums, and do a little bit more EQing on some of the other tracks just to get them sounding how I want them in the mix.